Have you ever wondered what it really feels like when an entire nation goes broke? Not a company, not a family, but an entire country. Imagine waking up one morning in 1929, stocks crashing, banks collapsing, and millions of Americans watching everything they've built vanish overnight. The streets of New York echo with panic. Families who once lived in luxury now stand in breadlines. And as chaos spreads across America, one question burns in the mind of every citizen: who caused this? And could it happen again? Welcome to Financial Primer, where we peel back the layers of money, power, and history to uncover how the systems shaping our wealth today were born out of crisis. If you've ever wanted to understand how the United States truly became a financial superpower and how close it came to losing everything, then stay with me. Because what happened in the Great Depression didn't just change America, it changed money itself. But here's the thing most people don't realize. The Great Depression wasn't just an accident. It was a turning point, a moment when America's entire financial structure was rebuilt from the ashes of Wall Street's greatest collapse. Let's go back. It's the roaring 1920s, the decade of jazz, automobiles, and sky-high ambition. The US stock market had become a casino where everyone, barbers, housewives, and factory workers, was playing for fortune. Banks were giving out loans like candy, and investors were buying stocks with borrowed money. The nation believed the good times would last forever, but behind the champagne and ticker tape, something dangerous was building: credit, speculation, and greed. By 1929, total margin debt, money borrowed to buy stocks, had reached nearly $8.5 billion, an unimaginable figure at the time. Even more shocking, that was more than the entire federal budget of the United States. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research shows that by late 1929, stock prices had become nearly 3 times their real value. Companies that barely made a profit were being traded like gold mines. The illusion of endless growth was everywhere. And then, it happened. October 24th, 1929, Black Thursday. A wave of panic hit Wall Street. Stocks began to tumble. Within hours, billions of dollars evaporated. Bankers like J.P. Morgan and the heads of Chase and National City Bank tried to restore confidence by buying large blocks of stocks. But it was too late. The fear had already spread. In just a few days, over $14 billion in market value disappeared. Within a month, more than $30 billion, an amount greater than what the U.S. had spent in World War I, was gone. People lost their savings, their homes, their faith in the system. Bankers jumped from office windows. Families gathered outside closed banks, hoping to withdraw money that no longer existed. But here's where the story takes a turn few Americans know. The Great Depression didn't just break people, it broke trust. And when trust in money dies, the rules of the game change forever. As thousands of banks failed, over 9,000 between 1930 and 1933, President Herbert Hoover tried to reassure the public that prosperity was just around the corner. But the numbers told another story. Unemployment rose to 25%, meaning 1 in 4 Americans had no job. Entire cities in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania turned into ghost towns. Factories that once produced cars and steel shut down. Farmers in the Midwest watched crops rot while they starved. The Dust Bowl devastated the Great Plains, forcing families to migrate west in search of work. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, the institution created just 16 years earlier to stabilize the financial system, did something shocking. It stood still. Instead of flooding the economy with cash to keep banks alive, the Fed tightened credit. In simple terms, it made borrowing harder, not easier. Historians and economists, including Milton Friedman in his later research for the Journal of Political Economy, would call this one of the most catastrophic policy mistakes in U.S. history. The people lost faith not just in money, but in leadership. And that's when Franklin D. Roosevelt stepped in. When he took office in 1933, America was on its knees. But FDR did something no president before him had dared to do. He fundamentally rewired the country's financial system. He declared a bank holiday, shutting down every bank in the nation for days. It sounded insane, but it stopped the bleeding. During that pause, government inspectors examined the books and decided which banks were stable enough to reopen. Then came the New Deal, a series of programs, jobs, and reforms meant to rebuild not just the economy, but the American spirit. Roads, dams, bridges, all funded by the government, put millions back to work. For the first time, Washington took direct control of reviving the nation's economy. But FDR's most controversial move? He went after gold. In 1933, Executive Order 6102 made it illegal for Americans to own gold. Citizens were forced to exchange it for paper dollars at a fixed rate. The government then revalued gold, effectively devaluing the dollar overnight. It was a radical shift, and it marked the end of America's full gold standard. From that moment on, money wasn't just backed by gold, it was backed by trust in the government, the very same trust that had almost vanished just years before. But here's where the story deepens, because while the Great Depression ended for some, it planted the seeds of a new financial empire for others. Banks that survived grew even stronger. Families that had cash on hand, like the Rockefellers and Morgans, bought distressed assets for pennies. While the poor lost everything, a small elite class quietly built fortunes that would shape American power for decades. Some economists say that every financial crisis creates its own winners. And in this case, those winners would go on to define Wall Street's dominance for the next century. By the time World War II began, the American economy had transformed. The government was spending at levels never seen before, borrowing heavily to fund the war effort. Yet strangely, this debt brought prosperity. Factories reopened, jobs returned, innovation exploded. And when the war ended, the United States emerged not as a broken nation, but as the wealthiest on earth. The Great Depression had burned the old system to the ground, but from its ashes, a new kind of financial America was born, one powered not by gold, but by confidence, credit, and consumption. Yet here's the haunting question that remains today. If trust built this new America, what happens if that trust breaks again? Because debt is once again soaring past $30 trillion, and the very institutions meant to protect us have become the same ones we question. And that leads us straight into the next part of this story. Because what came after the Great Depression wasn't just recovery, it was the creation of a financial system that ensured history would almost repeat itself. So before we go there, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Financial Primer, where we uncover how money, power, and history collide to shape your future. Now, what if I told you the next financial collapse wasn't born in 1929, but in the decades that followed? That's where we're going next. The Great Depression didn't just destroy wealth, it rewired America's financial DNA. After 1933, President Roosevelt's reforms reshaped how the nation saw money, banks, and power itself. For the first time, Americans believed that the government, not Wall Street, was their ultimate financial backstop. But that trust came at a cost. When FDR created the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, it was hailed as a miracle. Finally, people could put their savings back into banks without fear of losing everything. Deposits up to $5,000 were insured by the government, a revolutionary promise at the time. But here's the hidden truth. The FDIC didn't just protect savers. It created something far more powerful, confidence. And confidence, not gold, became the new foundation of the American financial system. With that confidence came credit, and with credit came debt. Banks began to lend again. Families bought homes, cars, and radios on installment. Businesses borrowed to expand. America was alive again, but its pulse was now powered by borrowed money. By the 1950s, the country had fully transformed into a credit economy. Suburbs spread, manufacturing boomed, and the US dollar became the most trusted currency on earth. But beneath that prosperity, the government was quietly building something extraordinary and dangerous. It was laying the groundwork for endless spending. World War II had proven that massive debt could spark massive growth. When the war ended in 1945, the US owed over $250 billion more than it had ever owed in its history. But instead of collapsing under that weight, the nation prospered. Why? Because for the first time, debt wasn't seen as destruction, it was seen as investment. Government spending built highways, schools, hospitals. The GI Bill put millions of veterans through college and into new homes. Tax revenues soared and productivity skyrocketed. The lesson seemed clear. The right kind of debt could make America richer. But what happens when the line between good debt and too much debt starts to blur? By the 1960s, the cracks began to show. The Vietnam War drained billions. Social programs expanded, inflation quietly crept in, and foreign nations holding US dollars began asking a dangerous question. If America's currency is backed by gold, why does it keep printing more money than it has gold to cover? This question would lead to one of the most pivotal moments in US financial history. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made a decision that forever changed the world's economy. He ended the Bretton Woods Agreement, the system that allowed other nations to exchange US dollars for gold. In one night, the dollar became purely fiat, backed not by gold, but by faith. Faith in the US government, faith in the Federal Reserve, faith that America would always make good on its promises. It was bold, it was risky, and it worked for a while. With the dollar no longer tied to gold, the US could print as much money as needed to finance its ambitions. Wars, infrastructure, and later bailouts. The world didn't protest. In fact, it followed America's lead. Soon, global trade was built around the dollar. Oil was priced in dollars, international loans were made in dollars, and the Federal Reserve, once a regional safety net, became the heartbeat of the world economy. But there was one problem. When money can be created out of thin air, the temptation to overspend never goes away. By the late 1970s, inflation was spiraling. Prices doubled. Gas lines stretched for miles. Americans who had lived through the Great Depression began to whisper that maybe, just maybe, history was starting to rhyme. And yet, just like before, crisis created opportunity. In the 1980s, President Ronald Reagan unleashed a new era of deregulation and corporate expansion. Taxes were slashed, markets were opened, and debt was once again celebrated as the engine of growth. Wall Street soared, but the financial system had quietly become addicted to credit, leverage, and speculation. The very same forces that had caused the Great Depression were back, but now they had better suits, faster computers, and global reach. By the 1990s, America's national debt had crossed $4 trillion. By the early 2000s, it doubled again. And today, it stands at over $34 trillion, a number so massive that it's hard to even visualize. Let's break that down. If you stacked 34 trillion $1 bills, the pile would reach the moon and back, more than 7 times. And yet, politicians on both sides keep promising more spending, more programs, more bailouts. The question is, who's really paying for it? Research from the US Treasury Department and reports in the Wall Street Journal show that over 40% of America's debt is held by foreign entities. China owns more than $800 billion of it. Japan holds even more. Meanwhile, countries like the UK, Switzerland, and even oil-rich nations in the Middle East continue to finance America's lifestyle by buying its debt. In other words, America doesn't just owe itself, it owes the world. And just like during the Great Depression, the cracks are starting to show. Inflation is rising again. The cost of living in major states like California, New York, and Texas is hitting record highs. Interest rates are climbing, making borrowing more expensive for both citizens and the government. And here's the eerie part. While the numbers are bigger, the story feels the same. In the 1920s, it was speculation on stocks. Today, it's speculation on everything: crypto, housing, technology. In the 1930s, it was a collapse of confidence. Today, it's a growing doubt in the stability of the dollar itself. Even insiders are starting to whisper that the next crisis might not come from Wall Street, but from Washington. Because when your entire economy runs on debt, what happens when the world stops lending you money? Some analysts suggest America could inflate its way out, printing more dollars while reducing the real value of its debt. Others fear this would spark hyperinflation, the very nightmare that destroyed economies like Weimar Germany in the 1920s. A confidential Congressional Budget Office report leaked in 2023 warned that if federal spending continues unchecked, interest payments on the debt could surpass $1 trillion per year within the next decade. That means America could soon be spending more on interest than on national defense. And yet, history offers a clue. The same country that once banned gold ownership in the 1930s now holds the largest gold reserves on Earth, over 8,000 tons, stored in places like Fort Knox and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Why? Because deep down, even in an age of digital money and credit, gold still represents something that can't be printed: real value. Maybe the real plan isn't just about repaying debt in cash. Maybe it's about repaying it in control. America's economic influence, the dollar's global dominance, allows it to do what no other country can: borrow from the world in its own currency. That's the ultimate privilege. And it's what keeps the system alive. But as nations like China, Russia, and even Saudi Arabia begin trading in other currencies, that dominance is quietly being tested. If the dollar loses its throne, America could face a reckoning that makes the Great Depression look like a rehearsal. The real question is, would the US government ever allow that to happen? History suggests it wouldn't. When faced with crisis, America always reinvents itself through innovation, technology, and new financial frontiers. From the birth of the Federal Reserve to the rise of Silicon Valley, the nation has turned every collapse into an evolution. But every evolution comes with winners and losers. And if there's one lesson from the Great Depression, it's this: those who understand how money truly works, how it's created, controlled, and distributed, will always stay ahead. That's why learning about money isn't just education anymore, it's survival. Because what happened in 1929 could happen again. Different players, different tools, but the same story of greed, trust, and power. So the next time you hear about the national debt climbing higher, ask yourself, who really benefits from a nation that owes more than it can ever repay? And if the government ever decided to raise taxes to reduce that debt, would you, as a citizen, be willing to pay more for the love of the country? Or would you demand to know what went wrong and who profited while the rest of America carried the bill? Because somewhere in the archives of history and in the confidential pages of those budget reports, the answers are already written. The only question left is, will America learn from its past or repeat it? If you found this story eye-opening, make sure you're subscribed to Financial Primer, where we explore the stories of money, power, and history that shape your life every single day. Because in the end, understanding the past isn't just about curiosity, it's about protecting your future.